A blind girl was pushed down the stairs inside the school, but just when all seemed lost, a mysterious man appeared to change her destiny. What happened next would forever transform not only her life, but the lives of hundreds of other children. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The millionaire watched the city from high up in his penthouse office. His empire stretched across blocks of Manhattan, but the emptiness inside him grew at the same rate. The back-to-back meetings, the multi-million-dollar deals, the international negotiations. None of it filled that constant feeling that something important was slipping through his fingers. Dressed impeccably in his black suit, with his tie perfectly aligned, he was the personification of quiet power. Meanwhile, miles away in Brooklyn, an 8-year-old girl carefully felt her way down the staircase, her small fingers seeking security. On every inch of the railing as she went down to recess, the deafening noise of children running and shouting disoriented her. Even after 2 years of blindness, she still hadn't gotten used to the storm of sounds that surrounded her daily at school. "Look at the Blindy trying to come down alone," whispered a voice she recognized immediately. The group of senior boys was standing on the landing below. She gripped the railing tighter, ignoring the comment as her teacher had suggested. "Just keep walking," she said to herself, repeating her daily mantra. The millionaire signed the last document of the day and dismissed his assistant. Silence returned to the room. He stood up and walked to the bookcase where he kept the only personal object in the entire corporate environment, a framed photograph of a smiling woman. His fingers lightly touched the image, as if trying to reach something very distant. The cell phone rang, interrupting that rare moment of vulnerability. It was the third call from his daughter's school that week. He sighed deeply before answering. The complaints were always the same. The girl wasn't adjusting. She needed specialized support. The institution wasn't equipped for visually impaired students. "I understand," he replied mechanically, not really processing what was being said on the other end of the line. "I'll talk to her again." Meanwhile at school, the girl felt a hard shove in the back. The world spun in a second of absolute terror. Her hands lost their grip on the railing, and her body was thrown forward. The fall seemed endless. Each impact against the steps sent waves of pain through her small body. When she finally stopped, sprawled on the cold floor of the lobby, the silence that followed was deafening. No one ran to help her. No one called for help. She heard only muffled laughter and footsteps walking away. Her trembling hands felt around the floor in search of her sunglasses while trying to hold back tears. The school principal only appeared minutes later, when recess had already ended. "On the floor again. How many times do we have to tell you that you shouldn't be walking around the school alone?" The physical pain was intense, but what really hurt was the injustice. The girl swallowed her tears, as she had learned to do in recent years. In her world of permanent darkness, she had learned that crying only made things worse. The millionaire hung up the phone and looked again at the photograph on the bookcase. The woman in the image seemed to watch him with a certain disappointment. He knew he was failing, but he couldn't find a way to change. The empire he built demanded all his time and energy. There was no room for a child who couldn't even look him in the eyes. At that moment, in different locations in the city, both the man and the girl shared the same feeling, a deep and suffocating isolation that no word could express. It was almost noon when the millionaire's phone rang again. He frowned as he recognized the school's number. 2 calls in the same day was unheard of, and his heart sped up involuntarily. With a tense expression, he answered. "There was an incident with your daughter," said the voice on the other end, artificially calm. "She fell down the stairs during recess and is in the nurse's office." "Fell?" he questioned, feeling a pang of distrust. "Yes, an unfortunate accident. Unfortunately, with her condition, these episodes are predictable." The way the word condition was pronounced, as if his daughter's blindness were a contagious disease, awakened something within him. A distant memory, almost erased, emerged from the depths of his consciousness. "I'm on my way," he replied dryly, hanging up without waiting for an answer. In the school nurse's office, the girl was sitting on a cot, her legs dangling in the air. A small bandage covered her knee and another on her forehead. Her fingers nervously slid over her uniform, adjusting invisible folds. "Your dad is coming to get you," the nurse informed her, in a tone that made it clear her discomfort at having to care for that problem child. The girl just nodded without showing any reaction. Her father coming to school was so rare that she could barely remember the last time. Since her mother left 2 years ago, he had become almost a stranger, a ghost-like presence that appeared briefly before she slept and disappeared before dawn. When the millionaire entered the school building, all eyes turned to him. His impeccable suit and authoritarian posture contrasted with the simple environment of the institution. However, it wasn't his appearance that caused discomfort, but the aura of contained power that emanated from him. "I want to speak with the principal," he said to the receptionist, who immediately picked up the phone, intimidated by the presence of that man who rarely appeared at school meetings. While he waited, his eyes scanned the lobby and stopped on the steps of the main staircase. Some drops of blood were still visible on the last steps, small red stains that contradicted the story of a simple accident. His gaze rose slowly to the top of the stairs, and for a brief moment he seemed to see himself, decades ago, fallen in similar circumstances. The principal appeared hastily, with a nervous smile and extending his hand. What a surprise to have. "You here? I'm so sorry about the little accident. But these things happen, especially with—" "Where is my daughter?" he interrupted, ignoring the outstretched hand. "In the nurse's office, of course. She's being very well taken care of." As he entered the small white room, the millionaire felt his heart clench. The girl looked so small and fragile, sitting on that cot, so distant from the image he held in his memories. When she turned her face toward the sound of his footsteps, he noticed the cut lip and the small bruise that was beginning to form on her right cheek. "Dad?" she called uncertainly. Something strange happened at that moment. The man who commanded meetings with dozens of executives without showing any emotion felt his throat tighten. He approached slowly, and for the first time in years, truly looked at his daughter, not just saw, but truly looked. "What happened?" he asked, with a voice he didn't even recognize himself. "I fell," she replied mechanically, as if repeating a rehearsed phrase. "The truth," he insisted, kneeling to be at her level. The girl hesitated. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cot tightly. "They pushed me," she finally whispered, so low that only he could hear. "Like the other times." "Other times?" he questioned, feeling a wave of guilt and anger grow simultaneously. "It happens almost every day," she confessed, with a resignation that no child should know. "The principal says it's because I'm different, and people are afraid of what's different." The millionaire remained silent for a few moments, processing those words. A painful memory emerged with clarity. Himself, at 10 years old, hearing similar words from his own mother. It was then that he made a decision. Not out of impulse or momentary anger, but out of something deeper, a calling he had ignored for too long. "Let's go home," he said softly, helping her down from the cot. As he passed the principal, who was waiting nervously in the hallway, the millionaire simply said, "I'll be back tomorrow. We have unfinished business." The man who entered that school wasn't the same one who was leaving now, carrying his daughter. For the first time in years, something had awakened, something that had remained dormant for decades. The next morning, the millionaire watched his daughter sleeping. The soft light of dawn drew delicate shadows on the small bruises on her face. For the first time in years, he had cancelled all of his meetings for the day. His assistant, perplexed by the sudden decision, tried to argue about the importance of those commitments, but encountered a determination she had never seen before in her boss. When the girl woke up, she seemed confused to feel someone's presence in the room. "Dad, are you still here?" she asked, feeling the air with her fingers. "I am," he replied, surprised by the question that revealed so much about his daily absence. "But your work, you're never here." Those simple words carried a weight that hit him like a punch. She was right, he was never there. Since his wife's death, he had built invisible walls between himself and his daughter, sheltering himself in work, in endless meetings, in business trips. "Today is different," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Today I want to hear everything about school." The girl hesitated, as if distrustful of that sudden interest. Her fingers played nervously with the edge of the sheet. "There isn't much to tell," she finally replied. "The pushing, the falls. I want to know everything." A heavy silence settled between them. The girl turned her face towards the window, as if she could see through it. "I don't want to cause trouble," she murmured. "The principal already said that I'm too much work, that the school isn't equipped for students like me." The millionaire took a deep breath, fighting against a wave of guilt. How had he allowed his daughter to face all of that alone? "When you lost your sight," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I promised your mother that you would have everything you needed. I failed that promise." "It's not your fault," she replied with a disconcerting maturity. "After Mom was gone, everything became different. I know it's hard for you to look at me." That observation hit him with a painful clarity. It was true. Looking at his daughter meant facing the ghost of the woman he loved, meant confronting the guilt for not having noticed the disease in time, for having been too busy with his acquisitions and mergers while his family fell apart. "Do you know who pushed you yesterday?" he asked, deliberately changing the course of the conversation. "The principal's son and his friends," she replied without hesitation. "They've been doing it for months. They say I'm wasting school resources, that students like me should study in special schools." Each word was like a knife. The millionaire stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, the impeccable garden of the mansion contrasted with the chaos he felt internally. He had built a financial empire. He was respected in the most exclusive business circles, but he couldn't protect his own daughter. "I'm not going back to school," declared the girl, interpreting her father's silence as disapproval. "I can have private tutors, like you always suggested." With his back to her, the millionaire clenched his fists. It would be easier that way, to isolate her in that mansion, hire the best educators, keep her away from a world that wasn't prepared to welcome her. It was the practical, efficient solution, aligned with his business mindset. But something inside him revolted against that idea. "No," he replied firmly, "you are going back to that school." "But Dad, and I'm going with you." The girl tilted her head, confused by that unexpected statement. "What are you going to do?" she asked in a whisper. The millionaire sat back down beside her, taking her small hands in his. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago." That afternoon, he received his most trusted lawyers in his home office. For hours, documents were analyzed, contracts drafted, legal strategies discussed. When the meeting ended, the millionaire had a plan. In the evening, he returned to his daughter's room for dinner, something he hadn't done in years. While they ate in silence, he watched how she navigated the plate with precision, how her fingers found the glass without spilling a drop. There was so much strength in that child he barely knew. "Tomorrow we'll go to school together," he announced, as he cleared the dishes. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice trembling. The millionaire stopped, surprised by that admission. He couldn't remember the last time they had shared something as honest as fear. "I've been scared for a long time too," he finally replied. "That's why I pulled away. But that ends tomorrow." Before leaving the room, he did something he hadn't done since she was very small. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling the soft scent of her baby shampoo. "Rest. Tomorrow will be a new beginning for both of us." As he walked through the silent hallway of the mansion, the millionaire felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble. The fear was still there, the pain of loss as well. But now something stronger was emerging, a fierce determination to protect the only treasure that truly mattered in his entire empire. The next morning, a black car pulled up in front of the school. The chauffeur opened the door, and the millionaire stepped out first, adjusting his impeccable suit before extending his hand to help his daughter. Several students arriving stopped to observe the unusual scene, that mysterious man who rarely appeared, now walking hand in hand with the blind girl. "Everyone's looking at us," she whispered, noticing the change in the chatter around them. "Let them look," he replied quietly. "Today, they'll see something they'll never forget." At the reception desk, the secretary almost spilled her coffee at the sight of the millionaire. Quickly, she picked up the phone to announce his arrival to the principal. "That won't be necessary," he said, raising his hand. "I'd like you to gather the entire faculty and staff in the conference room in 15 minutes. But sir, there are classes in session and 15 minutes, he repeated in a tone that brooked no argument. While they waited in the hallway, the millionaire observed the details of the building with new eyes. The peeling paint, the burned-out light bulbs, the uneven floor. The school wasn't the safe and welcoming environment he had imagined when enrolling his daughter years ago. "How do you manage to navigate this place?" he asked the girl, genuinely impressed. "I count the steps," she replied simply. 32 from the entrance to the first classroom, 19 to the water fountain, 45 to the stairs. She paused before adding, 23 steps to the second floor, where my classroom is. That answer left him speechless. While he spent his days worried about corporate mergers and financial market fluctuations, his daughter counted steps to survive. In the conference room, teachers and staff gradually arrived, casting curious glances at the man who remained standing, hand in hand with the girl. The principal entered last, with a nervous smile plastered on his face. "What a pleasant surprise to have you here again," he began, extending his hand, although a heads-up would have been... The millionaire ignored the gesture, interrupting him with a wave of his hand. "I'm here to talk about what happened to my daughter," he declared, his voice filling the room. "Not just yesterday, but in the last 2 years." An uncomfortable silence dominated the room. Some teachers exchanged apprehensive glances. "As you may know, my daughter lost her sight after her mother's death, a trauma that affected the optic nerve, according to the doctors. Since then, we have relied on this institution's ability to educate her properly." He paused, looking directly at each face in the room. "That trust has been betrayed." "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding," the principal tried to intervene. "Your daughter receives all the attention possible, considering our institutional limitations." "Limitations," repeated the millionaire, as if savoring the word. "It's interesting how we use that word to mask negligence." He turned to his daughter and gently asked her to tell everyone what she had told him the night before. The girl hesitated, squeezing her father's hand tighter. "I'm not sure," she whispered. "It's okay," he assured her. "I'm here with you." With her voice initially trembling, but gaining firmness with each word, the girl described the months of bullying, the accidental shoves, the objects removed from her path to make her trip, the mean whispers when the teachers turned their backs. She spoke about the times she asked for help and heard that she needed to learn to defend herself, about how she was always treated as an administrative problem instead of a student. As she spoke, several staff members lowered their eyes, unable to sustain the millionaire's accusatory gaze. "Why were we never informed of these incidents?" he questioned when his daughter finished her account. "There were reports of adaptation difficulties," replied the principal defensively. "We even suggested specialized education, but you insisted on regular integration." Adaptation difficulties, repeated the millionaire with a dry, humorless laugh. Is that what you call it when a child is systematically assaulted under your care? He opened his briefcase and took out a thick envelope, placing it on the table. What is this? Asked the principal, suddenly alarmed. The solution to the institutional limitations, he replied calmly. From inside the envelope, he removed legal documents and slid them across the table. The principal paled as he began to read them. You can't be serious, he stammered. Very serious, confirmed the millionaire. Effective as of this moment, I am the new owner of this institution. The building, the administration, everything has been legally acquired. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Teachers looked at each other, incredulous. As CEO of the companies that now control this school, my first official action is to announce a complete restructuring. He looked at his watch before continuing. You have exactly 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and leave the building. Everyone is dismissed from their positions with the due severance pay provided by law. You can't just come in and fire everyone, protested a teacher. Actually, I can, he replied serenely. And that's exactly what I'm doing. He turned to his daughter and with softness in his voice asked, Is there any staff member who has been kind to you? Someone who deserves to stay? The girl thought for a moment before answering hesitantly, The lady in the library. She always reads to me during lunch. And the janitor who put tape on the floor to help me find my way to the restroom. The millionaire nodded. Only these 2 people are invited to remain in their positions with revised salaries. The rest must leave now. As the room emptied amidst muffled protests and looks of indignation, the millionaire knelt before his daughter. From today, this place will be different, he promised. It will be a place where no child will need to count steps in fear. For the first time since they entered the school, a small smile appeared on the girl's lips. Are they coming back? She asked, referring to the classmates who tormented her. Some will, he replied honestly, but the rules will be different, and you won't be alone anymore. In that moment, with his daughter smiling shyly and the school suddenly silent around him, the millionaire finally saw beyond what his eyes could see. He was seeing with his heart, something he hadn't done in years. In the weeks that followed, the school underwent a radical transformation. The millionaire brought in architects specializing in inclusive design, special education consultants, and a hiring team that carefully selected new teachers with experience in inclusion. The physical structure of the building was completely renovated. Handrails were installed in all the hallways, tactile flooring placed for guidance, an audio system for announcements, and braille signage on all the doors. The librarian and the janitor, the only ones retained from the previous staff, barely recognized the place where they had worked for years. Both received specialized training and saw their salaries triple. I never imagined I'd see something like this in my lifetime, commented the elderly librarian, observing the new reading room equipped with braille books and audiobooks. I always knew that girl was special, but I had no idea who her father was. The janitor, who now coordinated a maintenance team, just shook his head, equally impressed. Sometimes we need someone who can see what's right in front of our eyes, he replied, looking at the millionaire who was personally supervising every detail of the renovation. While the school was being rebuilt, the girl remained at home, receiving private lessons from the best specialized educators that money could hire. For the first time in years, the millionaire reorganized his schedule to be present during part of these lessons, silently observing how his daughter absorbed knowledge with an impressive eagerness. She has extraordinary potential, commented one of the teachers after a science lesson. Her capacity for mental visualization and memory is exceptional. The millionaire nodded, feeling simultaneously pride and remorse for having taken so long to realize this. On a rainy afternoon, while working in his home office, he heard a light knock on the door. It was his daughter, standing in the doorway, holding a braille book against her chest. "Can I stay here with you?" she asked timidly. "Of course," he replied, surprised and touched by the request. She entered carefully, counting the steps as usual, until she found the sofa in the corner of the room. She sat down and opened the book, her fingers gliding over the pages in silence. The millionaire tried to return to work, but he caught himself, looking at her every few minutes, noticing how her expression changed subtly as she read, how her lips sometimes moved, forming silent words. "What's the story?" he asked finally, unable to contain his curiosity. "It's about a prince who was bewitched and couldn't see the beauty around him," she replied, without lifting her face from the book. "He could only see with his heart after he met a girl from the neighboring kingdom." "And does he manage to break the spell?" he asked, completely abandoning the documents on his desk. "I haven't gotten to that part yet," she replied with a small smile. "But I think so. It's almost always possible to break spells in stories." That observation, made with such simplicity, hit the millionaire deeply. For years, he himself had lived under a kind of spell, trapped in his world of numbers, contracts, and power, unable to see the treasure he had at home. "Can I read a little to you?" asked the girl, surprising him again. "I'd love that," he replied sincerely. While listening to his daughter's soft voice reading aloud, her small hands moving skillfully over the raised markings, the millionaire felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years, a simple and pure happiness, disconnected from material achievements or corporate victories. The following week, the new school was ready to reopen its doors. The millionaire had sent letters to all the families in the neighborhood announcing the institution's new policy. Half of the places would be reserved for children with different types of disabilities, with full scholarships available for low-income families. The former students would be readmitted pending individual interviews and formal commitment to the new guidelines for coexistence. On the eve of the reopening, he took his daughter to see the new space. With patience, he walked beside her through the renovated hallways, describing every detail of the changes, allowing her fingers to explore the new textures and signage. "This will be your classroom," he said, opening the door of a classroom specially designed with enhanced acoustics and adaptable desks. The girl walked slowly through the space, touching the desks, the books arranged on low shelves, the tactile map on the wall. "It smells new," she commented, inhaling deeply, "and it's not so noisy anymore." "The soundproofing helps," he explained. "That way you can hear the teachers and classmates better." When they reached the renovated auditorium, she stopped, as if she felt something different in the environment. "What is this place?" she asked, perceiving the peculiar acoustics. "The auditorium," he replied, guiding her to the stage, completely renovated for recitals, plays, and performances, including music. "Music?" she repeated with a sudden interest. "Yes. I remember your mother always saying that you had a musical ear. There will be a permanent piano on stage, and music teachers will come 3 times a week." The girl was silent for a moment, and the millionaire noticed a tear running down her cheek. "Mum used to play for me every night," she said finally, her voice choked with emotion. "Since she left, I haven't heard any piano." The millionaire felt a lump in his throat. It was true. The piano that occupied a prominent place in the living room had been covered and eventually removed after his wife's death. It was too painful to see the silent instrument. "Would you like to play?" he asked gently, leading her to the bench. When her fingers touched the ivory keys, the girl smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She began to play a simple melody that her mother had taught her years ago. Hesitant notes at first, which gained confidence with each measure. The millionaire watched, marveling. How had he never noticed this talent? How had he allowed music to disappear from both of their lives for so long? As his daughter played, silent tears streamed down the face of the man who commanded empires. In that moment, between the walls of a renovated school, invisible ties began to rebuild, just as the piano notes once again filled the void that pain had created. The day of the school's reopening arrived with great anticipation. Journalists crowded at the entrance, drawn by the unusual story of the powerful businessman who had bought an entire institution to protect his daughter. Cameras recorded the arrival of the new students, children in wheelchairs, with hearing aids, guide dogs, and various other visible evidence of the new inclusive policy. The millionaire remained backstage, observing the movement with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. His public relations team had insisted that he make a formal statement, taking advantage of the media attention to promote his corporate image, but he had refused. This wasn't a marketing ploy. It was something personal, something that transcended the limits of business. However, when he saw his daughter get out of the car, holding the hand of her new specialized teacher, something changed within him. The way she walked now, with her head held high and confident steps, contrasted drastically with the withdrawn child who entered the old school with her head down. That vision crystallized a conviction that had been forming in recent weeks. "Set up a press conference for this afternoon," he told his assistant. "There's something I need to share." As the morning progressed, the millionaire toured the classrooms, discreetly observing how the new teachers conducted their activities, how the children interacted with each other, how his daughter actively participated in a science discussion, raising her hand to answer questions. During recess, he noticed how the staff members were strategically positioned in the playgrounds and hallways, ensuring that all students were safe and included. He saw his daughter talking to another girl, both laughing at something they shared, and he felt an intense emotion that he could barely name. In the afternoon, the auditorium was packed with journalists. Cameras were positioned, microphones adjusted, and a buzz of anticipation filled the room. The millionaire entered from the side of the stage, wearing his usual dark suit. But there was something different in his posture, a vulnerability that he had never before demonstrated in public. "I appreciate everyone's presence," he began, adjusting the microphone. "In recent weeks, there has been much speculation about my motivations for acquiring this school and transforming it into an inclusive institution. Today, I would like to clarify a few points." He paused, looking directly at the cameras. His lawyers and press advisors had prepared a carefully crafted speech, highlighting his company's commitment to social responsibility and the pioneering nature of the initiative. But at that moment, he decided to abandon the text. "The truth is, I failed. As a father," he declared, causing a surprised silence in the audience. "For years, after the death of my wife, I immersed myself in work and ignored my daughter's needs. I convinced myself that providing financially was enough, that building an empire would guarantee her future." The cameras clicked incessantly as the journalists absorbed that unexpected confession. When she lost her sight 2 years ago due to the emotional trauma of her mother's loss, I withdrew even further. It was too painful to see my own guilt reflected in her eyes that no longer saw. He took a deep breath before continuing. "What you are witnessing today is not an act of heroism or philanthropy. It's a father trying to repair years of emotional neglect." A murmur ran through the auditorium. This wasn't the corporate speech they expected. "But there's something else I've never shared publicly," he continued, his voice now lower, forcing everyone to lean forward. "Something that only my late wife knew." At that moment, he gestured to his assistant, who entered the stage, leading his daughter. The girl seemed confused by the noise of the cameras and the buzz of the crowd. The millionaire extended his hand, guiding her to his side before continuing. "When I was 9 years old, I also became blind. The silence that followed was absolute. The journalists looked at each other, stunned by the revelation. For 3 years, I lived in a world of darkness. It wasn't an accident or illness. It was the result of abuse. My stepfather, a violent man, assaulted me so severely that I suffered retinal detachment in both eyes. His daughter turned her face towards him, surprised. He had never shared this story with her. I was sent to a boarding school for visually impaired children far from my family. There, I learned to navigate in the dark, to read with my fingers, to count steps. I learned that the world can be cruel to those who are different. He paused, placing his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. After 3 years and multiple surgeries, I partially recovered my sight. It was like being born again. I promised myself that if one day I had the resources and power, no child would go through what I went through. But then, ironically, when my own daughter lost her sight, I did exactly what hurt me the most. I abandoned her emotionally. Tears glistened in his eyes, something unthinkable for those who knew his reputation in business circles. When I found out that she was being bullied at this school, something awakened inside me. I saw myself again in that helpless child I once was. I realized that my entire financial empire was worth nothing if I couldn't protect what really matters. The girl, listening to her father's words, reached out, seeking his hand. Their fingers intertwined in a gesture that said more than any speech. This school now has a new mission, he continued, his voice firmer. Not just to educate, but to transform, to show that our differences don't diminish us, they make us unique, and that everyone deserves to be seen, truly seen, beyond appearances. A journalist raised his hand, visibly moved. You mentioned that there was an investigation into the incident with your daughter. What did you find? The millionaire exchanged a quick glance with his lawyers before responding. We found that those responsible for the acts of bullying against my daughter were led by the former principal's son. The attacks were systematically ignored or minimized by the previous administration. The case is being handled by the competent authorities. And what about the former principal and teachers? Will they be prosecuted? Questioned another reporter. Legal measures are being taken, but it's not my goal to seek revenge. My focus is on transformation, not punishment. The former employees received all the compensation provided by law, and some are being referred to training programs in inclusive education. At the end of the press conference, as the journalists began to disperse, the girl gently tugged on her father's sleeve. Why did you never tell me that you were also blind? She asked in a low voice. The millionaire knelt down to be at her level, even though he knew he couldn't be seen. Because I tried to bury that part of my life. I thought, if I ignored the past, it would disappear. I was wrong. Is that why you always wore black? She asked, surprising him with her perception. How did you know that? The housekeepers talked about it. They said you only wore dark clothes since Mom left. He smiled, touching his daughter's face lightly. Yes, black was easier. When you can't see colors, you learn to simplify. Even after I regained my sight, I never lost that habit. And after your mother died, I went back to it. What was it like? She asked hesitantly, not seeing anything and then seeing again. It was like receiving a gift I never imagined I deserved, he answered honestly. I promise I'm going to do everything in my power so that you have that chance too. The girl's eyes widened. You think I can see again? The doctors say that your blindness is psychosomatic, a result of the trauma. With the right treatment, there's hope. But even if that never happens, I want you to know that you've taught me how to see again. With my heart. The girl smiled, a radiant smile that he would forever keep in his memory. At that moment, under the soft light of the auditorium, father and daughter were united by something deeper than blood ties. They were connected by an understanding that only those who have known darkness can truly understand. The story of the school's transformation and the surprising revelation about the millionaire's past quickly gained national attention. In a matter of days, his inbox was flooded with interview requests, invitations to speak, and, most surprisingly, hundreds of messages from people who had gone through similar experiences. "I never imagined there would be so many," he commented, as his assistant presented a report on the impact of the press conference. "People identify with your story," she replied. "You've humanized not only visual impairment, but also power itself. You've shown that even the seemingly untouchable have their scars." While public attention grew, life at the school began to find its rhythm. The girl, once isolated, was now surrounded by new friends, children who, like her, knew what it was like to be different. Her days were filled with adapted classes, music therapy sessions on the new piano in the auditorium, and for the first time, laughter during recess. The millionaire completely reorganized his schedule, delegating more responsibilities so that he could be present in his daughter's life. Every morning he personally took her to school, and he often had lunch with her in the new inclusive cafeteria, where the utensils and furniture had been specially designed to meet different needs. On a rainy afternoon, while waiting to pick her up after school, he received a call from his lead attorney. "We have a problem," said the voice on the other end of the line. "The former principal is orchestrating a class action lawsuit against you. He's gathering former employees and some families who are dissatisfied with the changes." "What's the basis of the lawsuit?" he asked without showing surprise. "They allege emotional distress, defamation, and a hostile takeover. But the real motive is revenge. He hasn't accepted the dismissal and the public exposure." The millionaire took a deep breath. He knew he would face resistance, but he hoped that the transparency of his actions and the evident benefits of the changes would be enough to silence the critics. "There's one more thing," continued the attorney hesitantly. "They're investigating your past. They managed to locate records from the boarding school where you were during your period of blindness and are seeking people who can contradict your story." That information hit him like a physical blow. His past was carefully isolated ground, a chapter of his life that he had mentioned publicly only once, during the press conference. "What do they hope to find?" he questioned, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm not sure exactly, but they're determined to undermine your credibility. If they can prove that your story was fabricated or exaggerated." "I understand," he interrupted dryly. "Keep me informed." He hung up the phone and remained motionless for a few moments while the rain beat against the car windows. The irony of the situation didn't escape him. Just when he was finally facing his past, it threatened to be used as a weapon against him. When his daughter got into the car, she immediately noticed the change in his mood. "Did something happen?" she asked as she settled into the seat. "Nothing important," he lied, forcing a casual tone. "How was your day?" During the drive home, she spoke animatedly about her classes, about the new friend who also played the piano, about the plans for a recital at the end of the month. He tried to concentrate, ask appropriate questions, show interest, but his mind was divided. Part in the bright present they were building, part in the shadows of the past that threatened to return. At home, after dinner, he received a call. It was his private investigator, hired to monitor the movements of the former principal. "He scheduled a meeting with someone who claims to have been your roommate at the boarding school," he informed. "A man named Thomas Blackwood. I managed to intercept some messages. He claims that your story isn't entirely true." "Thomas," murmured the millionaire, feeling a chill run down his spine. That name evoked almost forgotten memories. An older boy, with a voice always filled with resentment. "Do you want me to intervene?" asked the investigator. "I can offer Compensation so he doesn't talk. No, he replied firmly. Bribery would be admitting guilt. I need to deal with this directly. After hanging up, he remained in his office, staring at the darkness beyond the window. The rain had increased, turning into a storm, a perfect reflection of the turbulence he felt internally. He was interrupted by the light knock on the door, his daughter already in her pajamas holding her Braille book. "Can I come in?" she asked timidly. "Of course," he replied, quickly hiding the documents about the lawsuit. She walked to the sofa and sat down, but instead of opening the book, she kept it closed on her lap. "The doctor said I can start a new treatment," she announced suddenly, "for my eyes." The millionaire felt his heart race. After the press conference, he had intensified the search for specialists, consulted doctors in different countries, but always discreetly, without raising expectations. "What kind of treatment?" he asked cautiously. "A combination therapy, part psychological, part medicinal. He said there's a chance, since my blindness isn't structural." There was a contained hope in her voice that was simultaneously touching and frightening. The millionaire knew how dangerous unrealized hope could be. "That's great news," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "But you know you need to approach this without expecting too much, right? The process can be long, and the results aren't guaranteed." "I know," she replied, surprising him with her maturity. "But even if it doesn't work, I'm okay now. For the first time since Mom left, I don't feel alone in the darkness anymore." Her words hit him with unexpected force. Suddenly, the threats from the former principal, the investigations into his past, the possible public exposure, all of that seemed small compared to what really mattered. "Come here," he said, opening his arms. She approached, letting herself be enveloped in a hug that communicated more than words could express. "Whatever the result," he promised, "we'll be together every step of the way. I'm not going to hide in my own darkness anymore." And that night, while the storm lashed the windows of the mansion, father and daughter read together, she with her fingers tracing the raised markings, he with his eyes following the printed words. Two people who had known darkness united in the faint light of a new understanding. The next morning, the millionaire made a decision. Instead of waiting for the attack, he would face the past head-on. He asked his assistant to locate Thomas Blackwood and arrange a meeting. It was time to confront the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. What he didn't know was that, while he was preparing to fight his own battles, his daughter was facing her own challenges at school. The former principal's son, temporarily suspended after the investigation of the incident on the stairs, had returned that day, and he carried with him the weight of humiliation and the desire for revenge that his father had instilled in him. The shadow of the past extended not only over the millionaire, but also over his daughter, a shadow that threatened to swallow the light they had so carefully begun to cultivate. Thomas Blackwood was exactly as the millionaire remembered, tall, with a rigid posture and a voice that carried a permanent tone of superiority. Now a middle-aged man, with graying hair at the temples, he retained the same calculating look. As when they shared a dorm room at the boarding school for blind children, they met at a discreet coffee shop away from the city center. Without beating around the bush or formal greetings, Thomas went straight to the point. "So you've become one of the richest men in the country," he commented while stirring his coffee. "Impressive for someone who used to cry every night hugging his pillow." The millionaire kept his expression neutral, ignoring the provocation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Thomas. I imagine the former principal of the school has already contacted you." "Straight to the point, as always," Thomas smiled coldly. "Yes, he found me. He's willing to pay generously for any information that might damage your public image." "And what do you plan to tell him?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying the face of his former roommate. "The truth, naturally. That you were never completely blind. that you exaggerated your condition to receive attention and privileges, that you used your supposed disability to manipulate staff and other students. Each word was like a needle, precise and painful. The millionaire took a deep breath before replying. "We both know that's not true," he said calmly. "The medical records confirm that I suffered bilateral retinal detachment. The surgeries are documented." "Records can be altered when you have enough money," Thomas replied with disdain, "especially now with your influence." A waitress approached to refill their cups, creating a brief pause in the tense conversation. When she walked away, the millionaire leaned slightly forward. "Why are you doing this, Thomas?" "It's been more than 30 years." Something darkened in the other man's eyes. "Because you escaped, you got your sight back, left that place, built your empire, while I—" His voice faltered for a moment. "While I remained in the darkness, permanently and irrevocably." It was then that the millionaire understood. The resentment wasn't about the past. It was about the divergent paths that their lives had taken after that shared period. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," he said sincerely, "but destroying my reputation won't bring your sight back." "No," agreed Thomas, "but it will bring justice. You were always the teacher's pet, always received the best treatments, the best opportunities. Even blind, you had privileges that the rest of us never knew." "I was just a scared kid, just like you," argued the millionaire. "I had no control over what treatments I received." Thomas shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. "The world has always been kinder to you, even in disgrace. And now you're using your overcoming story to promote yourself, to appear noble and altruistic, when in reality you're just atoning for your guilt for neglecting your own daughter." The blow was accurate. The millionaire felt the impact of the words, recognizing the partial truth they contained. "My daughter is not part of this conversation," he said firmly. "Oh, but she is. This entire school transformation, this crusade for inclusion, it's all to compensate for years of absence. You're not a hero. You're just a guilty father trying to buy redemption." The millionaire's phone vibrated in his pocket. Normally, he would ignore any interruption during such an important meeting, but something compelled him to check it. It was a message from the new principal of the school. "I need you to come immediately. There has been an incident involving your daughter." His face must have betrayed his concern as Thomas tilted his head with curiosity. "Trouble in paradise?" The millionaire stood up abruptly, leaving some bills on the table to cover the check. "This conversation isn't over," he said, "but I have an emergency to attend to." Thomas smiled, a smile that didn't reach his permanently clouded eyes. "Run to your little princess. Meanwhile, the former principal and I will have plenty to talk about." The millionaire drove above the speed limit, with his heart pounding in his chest. The message didn't provide details, only the urgency of the call. 1,000 catastrophic scenarios played out in his mind as he crossed the city towards the school. Upon arriving, he was greeted by the principal in the parking lot, her grave face intensifying his apprehension. "What happened?" he asked, barely waiting for the car engine to be turned off. "Your daughter is physically fine," she rushed to clarify. "But there was a very serious incident involving the former principal's son." As they hurried through the hallways, the principal explained, the boy had returned that day after his suspension. During music class, he took advantage of a moment when the teacher left the room to approach the girl who was practicing alone at the piano. He destroyed her braille sheet music, said the principal, the indignation evident in her voice. And then he whispered in her ear that you were a liar, that your story of blindness was fabricated, and that soon everyone would know the truth. The millionaire stopped abruptly. "How did he know that?" he asked, more to himself than to the principal. "Apparently, his father is already spreading rumors throughout the community, using the boy as a weapon." The anger he felt at that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't the controlled fury that guided aggressive negotiations or the professional outrage against dishonest competitors. It was something primal, visceral. The protective rage of a father whose child has been attacked. They found the girl in the school psychologist's office. She was sitting quietly, her hands resting on her lap, her face turned to the window as if she could see through it. "Dad?" she called, recognizing his footsteps. "I'm here," he replied, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her lips trembled slightly. "He said you lied, that you were never blind, that everything is a lie so people will feel sorry for us." The millionaire closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. The past he had tried to face alone now directly affected his daughter. Exactly what he feared most. "Did you believe him?" he asked softly. "No," she replied, with surprising firmness. "I know you're telling the truth. I can feel when people lie, their voices change. Yours doesn't change when you talk about the past." A wave of relief and pride washed over him. His daughter, in her physical darkness, saw with a clarity that many sighted people would never achieve. "What he did with my sheet music was worse," she continued, a slight tremor in her voice. "I spent weeks learning those notes. Now I'll have to start from scratch." "Don't worry about that," he assured her. "We'll provide new sheet music immediately." The principal, who was watching the scene from the door, cleared her throat discreetly. "The young man is suspended indefinitely, of course, and we're considering permanent expulsion, given the circumstances." The millionaire nodded, grateful for the decision, but he knew that the problem was bigger than an isolated incident. It was a systematic campaign to discredit him, using his daughter as a target. That couldn't continue. "Let's go home," he said to the girl. "We have a lot to talk about." During the drive, he explained the situation as honestly and directly as possible. The former principal's accusations, the meeting with Thomas, the threats to his reputation. Instead of protecting her from the truth, he decided to include her. "They're trying to say that my story isn't true, that I exaggerated my condition to seem more heroic now." "Does that matter?" she asked, surprising him. "Even if you had never been blind, what you're doing now would still be important and right." Her simplicity cut through all the layers of complication that adults created. The millionaire smiled, touched by the wisdom of that child who, each day more, proved to see beyond what eyes could see. "You're right," he agreed. "But we still need to face this. People like the former principal don't give up easily." "So, what are we going to do?" she asked, emphasizing the "we" in a way that warmed his heart. "We're going to stop hiding," he replied, making a decision at the exact moment he spoke the words. "No more secrets, no more shame, no more allowing the past to control our present." As he drove home, a plan began to form in his mind. He wouldn't fight the shadows on the same terms as his adversaries, using veiled threats and manipulations. He would face everything with the same transparency that he had promised his daughter. "Tomorrow," he said determinedly, "we're going to tell our story. All of it, without filters." The next morning, the millionaire did something unprecedented. He postponed all corporate engagements indefinitely and delegated executive control of his companies to his vice president. The news caused turmoil in the financial markets. His stocks suffered an immediate drop. Analysts speculated about internal crises or health problems. No one imagined the true reason. "They're saying you've had a nervous breakdown," commented his assistant, showing the headlines on her tablet. "Others suggest you're fleeing criminal investigations." "Let them talk," he replied serenely. "They'll know the truth soon enough." With the help of his public relations team, now working under completely new guidelines, he organized an exclusive interview with a renowned journalist known for her integrity. There would be no pre-approved questions, no forbidden topics, no time limits. It would be an honest and comprehensive conversation, broadcast live. "Are you sure about this?" questioned his oldest consultant. "Once you're on the air, there will be no way to control the narrative." "That's exactly the idea," replied the millionaire. "I'm tired of controlling narratives." The interview would be held at the renovated school, with his daughter present as if she wished to participate. To his surprise, when consulted, the girl not only agreed, but insisted on being by his side. "We're a team now," she said simply, with a maturity that continued to impress him. On the morning of the interview, the schoolyard was transformed. Lights, cameras, technicians, and producers moved efficiently, preparing the set. The journalist, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and an impeccable reputation, arrived early to visit the location and familiarize herself with the story of the school transformation. "Impressive," she commented, while observing children with different disabilities comfortably navigating the adapted space. "But I want to know what's behind it all, the real story." "That's exactly what I've come to offer," replied the millionaire. When the cameras were turned on, millions of viewers tuned in to watch. The curiosity about the enigmatic businessman, who rarely gave interviews, combined with the recent rumors about possible scandals, guaranteed a record audience. "We're live with one of the most private and powerful men in the country," began the journalist, looking directly at the main camera. "A man who recently surprised everyone by revealing a past marked by visual impairment and by transforming an ordinary school into a model of inclusion. But in recent days, questions have arisen about the veracity of his story. Today, he's here to answer all questions without restrictions or conditions." She turned to the millionaire, who was sitting in a simple chair with his daughter beside him. "Let's start with the most direct question. Recently, people from your past have suggested that your story of temporary blindness was exaggerated or even fabricated. How do you respond to these accusations?" Without hesitating, the millionaire looked directly at the camera. "I understand why there are doubts. In my position, it's common for people to question every aspect of my life, especially when I reveal something so personal after decades of silence." He paused before continuing. "The truth is, I was diagnosed with bilateral retinal detachment at the age of 9 after physical assaults. I underwent 7 surgeries over 3 years while living at a specialized boarding school for visually impaired children. The medical records are available and were published in full on our website this morning, along with statements from the surgeons who are still alive." The journalist seemed momentarily surprised by the absolute transparency of that response. "What about Thomas Blackwood? He claims that you exaggerated your condition to receive preferential treatment." The millionaire nodded, as if expecting the question. "Thomas was my roommate for almost 2 years. His blindness was congenital and permanent, while mine was acquired and eventually partially reversible. That difference created an understandable resentment. So you confirm that there was differential treatment." "I confirm that I received medical treatments that other students didn't receive because my condition was potentially reversible. That created disparities that for a child like Thomas seemed deeply unfair." The girl, sitting quietly until then, moved slightly in her chair as if she wanted to say something. The journalist noticed and gently asked, "Would you like to comment on something?" "Yes, please," replied the girl with a clear and firm voice. "When we can't see, we hear much better. We perceive things that other people don't notice, like the tone of voice, small pauses, breaths. I know when my dad is telling the truth, and I know when he's not." A slight smile touched the journalist's lips. "And what do you perceive now?" "That he's being completely honest," she replied without hesitation, "even about the difficult parts." The interview continued for more than 2 hours, covering not only the millionaire's past, but also his absence in his daughter's life after his wife's death, his slow journey of reconnection, and the plans for the future of the school and other inclusive initiatives. When the journalist asked about the former principal and his campaign of defamation, the millionaire surprised everyone with his answer: "I hold no grudges." His reaction, although misguided, is understandable. "I turned his world upside down without any warning. I exposed flaws in his system that he probably didn't even consciously perceive. I destroyed in one day the career he had built over decades." "Are you defending the man who allowed your daughter to be assaulted?" questioned the journalist, incredulous. "I'm not defending his actions. I'm acknowledging his humanity. We all make mistakes when we operate from fear and insecurity. I did it myself for years with my own daughter." He looked at the girl before continuing. "What I've learned from her is that forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness. It's our greatest strength. I can't preach inclusion and understanding while harboring resentment." The girl smiled, reaching out to find her father's hand. In that simple gesture, captured by the cameras and broadcast to millions of homes, was the true essence of what they had built together. Not just a transformed school or a restored relationship, but a new way of seeing the world and its complexities. When the broadcast ended, the journalist turned off her microphone and extended her hand to the millionaire. "In 20 years of career, I've never witnessed so much honesty in an interview," she commented. "It's refreshing." "The truth is simpler to maintain," he replied. "We don't need to remember what we said when we say only what's real." At the end of that day, the interview had already gone viral. Commentators debated every detail. Social networks overflowed with clips and quotes. Experts analyzed its implications. But for the millionaire and his daughter, none of that mattered. They were finally free from the shadows of the past, from the chains of silence, from the invisible walls they had built around their hearts. Back at the mansion, while walking through the garden illuminated by the sunset, the girl held her father's hand tightly. "You know what I liked the most?" she asked. "What?" "When you said that we're building something together. Not just you for me, but both of us, as a team." The millionaire stopped, kneeling to be at her level. "It's the purest truth. You've taught me more about courage and honesty in these last few months than I've learned in my entire adult life." As the sun disappeared on the horizon, father and daughter remained together in the garden, two survivors of the darkness who had found in each other the light they had always sought. A year had passed since the transformation of the school and the revealing interview. The institution was now a national reference in inclusive education, receiving visitors from all over the country interested in replicating its model. What had begun as an act of paternal protection had expanded into a much larger movement. The millionaire had found a new purpose for his financial empire. He created a foundation dedicated to transforming schools into truly inclusive environments, funded research in assistive technology, and established a scholarship program for students with disabilities. Thomas Blackwood, surprisingly, became an unexpected ally. After the raw honesty of the interview, he contacted the millionaire proposing a truce. Eventually, he accepted the invitation to join the Foundation's advisory board, bringing his unique and valuable perspective as someone who had lived his entire life without sight. "Your sincerity completely disarmed me," he admitted during his first meeting. "I spent decades fueling a resentment based on the perception that you were denying your experience, when in reality I was the one who refused to see beyond my own suffering." The former school superintendent, after months of trying to sustain his smear campaign, finally backed down when irrefutable medical documents and testimonies from former boarding school teachers confirmed the millionaire's story. In a gesture that surprised many, he was invited to participate in an inclusive education training program, an invitation he accepted after much hesitation. The most difficult transformation isn't of buildings or systems, the millionaire commented during a lecture. It's of minds rooted in prejudice and fear. But the most significant change happened in the millionaire's personal life and his daughters. The mansion, once silent and nearly empty, was now frequently filled with music. The late wife's antique Steinway piano was uncovered and placed back in the main living room, where the girl practiced daily. Her musical talent had blossomed extraordinarily. In just a few months, she mastered pieces that experienced pianists took years to perfect. Her first public performance in the renovated school auditorium brought tears to the eyes of everyone present, not out of pity or superficial admiration, but because of the pure beauty of the music her sensitive fingers created. As for her vision, the doctors had started an experimental treatment combining intensive psychological therapy, medication, and neural stimulation. Progress was slow and inconsistent, but it existed. On some days, she could distinguish shapes and shadows. On others, only darkness. The journey would be long and without guarantees, but they faced each day with the same determination. The millionaire had also undergone profound transformations. The man who once lived exclusively for business now dedicated half his time to social causes and, more importantly, to his family. He started wearing colorful clothes again, first timidly, then with increasing confidence, as if he were finally allowing himself to live fully in a world of colors he had almost lost. One sunny spring afternoon, father and daughter strolled through Central Park near the mansion. It was a ritual they had established. Every Sunday, regardless of commitments or weather, they dedicated a few hours just to be together, talking or simply enjoying each other's company. "Dad," the girl called out as they walked hand in hand. "I think I saw something this morning." The millionaire stopped, his heart racing instantly. "What?" "A light. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't all dark like always. There was a brightness. Just for a moment, but it was there." He knelt before her, holding her hands delicately. "Did you tell the doctors about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." She hesitated before continuing. "I'm afraid of getting my hopes up. What if it's just my imagination?" The millionaire reflected for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "Even if it's just a glimmer, a fleeting moment, that's already a victory. And if it's nothing, we still have everything we've built together, which is much more valuable than any physical sight." She smiled, that radiant smile that always touched him deeply. "You know what I like most about you now?" she asked. "What?" "That you're no longer afraid of the truth or of hope." They continued walking in silence for a few minutes, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The park was full of families enjoying the Sunday, children running and laughing, elderly couples sitting on benches watching the activity. "Sometimes I think about Mom," the girl said suddenly. "I think she'd be happy to see us like this." "I'm sure she would," he replied, feeling that familiar mix of longing and gratitude that now accompanied the memories of his wife. "She used to say that you always had two hearts, one for business and another kept just for us, that one day you'd discover which was the most important." The millionaire stopped, surprised. His wife had always been perceptive, but he had never imagined she could see so clearly the conflict that he himself had taken decades to understand. "And do you think I've discovered it?" he asked softly. The girl turned her face towards him, and for an instant he had the impression that her eyes, normally unfocused, met his with impossible precision. "I think I always knew," she replied. "It just took someone to help you see it." In that moment, under the light filtered by the leaves of the trees, the millionaire understood the deepest truth of his journey. The blindness that really mattered had never been physical. It had been his inability to see what was right in front of him, the treasure that no fortune could buy. As they walked back towards home, the sun began to set, painting the sky, with shades of orange and pink that reflected in the windows of the mansion in the distance. The girl couldn't see that spectacle, but she smiled as if she felt the beauty of the moment in some way that transcended physical sight. "Describe it to me," she asked, as she often did during their walks. And he described it, not just the colors of the sky or the glow of the setting sun, but also the feeling that the view awakened, the warmth that touched not only the skin, but the soul. He transformed the scene into words that painted images, not just visual, but emotional. When they finished their walk and reached the gates of the mansion, the girl stopped suddenly. "I think I finally understand," she said. "What?" "Why some people can see with their eyes but remain blind, and why others, even without sight, manage to see everything that really matters." The millionaire smiled, marveling at the wisdom that flowed from that child who, in such a short time, had transformed his world as completely as he had transformed a simple school. "And what really matters?" he asked. "The invisible things," she replied without hesitation, "like love, courage, truth, things that can only be seen with the eyes of the heart." In that perfect instant, as the day gave way to night and the first stars began to dot the sky, the man who had built an empire understood that his true wealth was there in that small hand intertwined with his, in that wisdom that no money could buy, in that light that shone even in the deepest darkness. The path ahead would still be long. There would be days of challenges, moments of doubt, battles to be won. The girl's vision might return completely, partially, or never. But regardless of the outcome, both now saw clearly what really mattered, and that, the millionaire realized, was the greatest miracle of all. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.